Good morning. Another week. Welcome to Leadership Development in Education Online, and my name is Arv Cowshaw, and I look forward to introducing you to the session today. This week, big week, lots in the goodie bag this week for you. Today we have Will Smith. It's our second helping from Will, and I'll introduce him in a minute to you. We have Pran Patel on Thursday, and we have leadership, perception, bias and decolonization of the curriculum. On Friday, we have Nikki Goodman, and I look forward to introducing them to the platform as well. And then just want to introduce to you online today, we have on Twitter, we have Ian Stonnell from Denby. Hi. And he'll be doing a Twitter takeover today. And if you're on Twitter as well today, make sure you use the hashtag LDeduchat. All the sessions are recorded and they are available online on our @Chiltern TSA YouTube channel. And just mentioning @Chiltern TSA, if you are on Twitter, make sure you do follow to stay up to date with all the updates. Those of you that have joined, I've had a look through the list this morning, and there's quite a few of you that are becoming quite regular viewers, which is really, really good to see. It's brilliant to see. Lots of new faces as well. Just want to say a quick hi just to a few people that had logged on earlier on today that I saw. We've got Paolo from Portugal, we've got Freya from Rome, we've got Katie from sunny East Hearts, and then we've got Michelle from the Netherlands, and I'm sure there's many, many more of you that are now hooking in. The numbers are rising as we are speaking, and I'm hoping for another record turnout today. So today's session, we've got Will Smith. Will Smith is the CEO from Greenshaw's Learning Trust, which is a collection of schools in Surrey, ranging from all the way from Sutton all the way across to Henley, a range of secondary and primary schools. This is our second session with Will, who's been discussing leadership and leadership styles to do with the current situation, but also in general moving forward. Today he's going to look at the leadership of improvement, and I'm excited to see what he has to say about that. He also inspired the initiative By Leaders for Leaders, which is a collaborative initiative of over 700 CEOs, head teachers and SLT and middle leaders, and they collaborate on how to make leadership more accessible and also support structures in place that are needed to make sure you do your jobs effectively. Now, without further ado, what I will be doing now is playing you Will's video, which is on leadership of improvement.
Good morning and welcome to the second in this pair of webinars for the Chiltern Learning Trust. Delighted that you're able to join me this morning. A number of things I want to just talk through over the next 25 minutes, specifically around leadership and change management as a function of our leadership actions. And then I want to in particular look at how some of the strategies and resources that we've put in place at our trust and in some of our schools have helped achieve some really significant improvement. All of the resources that I'm talking about, all of the documents that I show you on the screen, I can make available if anybody wants to contact me either through this webinar or directly through Twitter, a direct message, or via my email address. So in the last webinar, we talked very briefly about change, and I just want to remind you really of an equation. I'm a physicist after all, that has stuck with me throughout my leadership career in helping me understand how I can create the very best conditions for change in the departments, in the schools, and now in the trust that I'm privileged to lead. It's a pretty simple principle really, and I think simplicity is very much at the heart of what's driven me as a leader. Whenever I've sought to change anything in my schools and in the departments in which I work, I've used this pretty basic equation as a driver for my understanding about the likelihood of success with the changes that we're bringing in. It could be curriculum, it could be teaching and learning, it could be a new behaviour system, it could be really anything. The same set of principles apply. And here it is. Don't be scared by an equation. It's a qualitative equation, and it says that the probability of successful change, The likelihood of you having success with the change that you want to bring in is a function of 4 different things. And those variables, those things are as follows. Firstly, a sense of dissatisfaction with where you are now. If everybody in your organisation is happy with everything that's taking place, and in particular with the thing that you want to change, the chance of success is limited. There needs to be some dissatisfaction with where you are, both in your own mind as a leader, but also a consensus of dissatisfaction in those around you. Sometimes it's possible to accelerate a sense of dissatisfaction if the change is urgent, but building that consensus is crucial. Secondly, a vision, an attractive end state, and we're pretty good at creating those. If we create and articulate really clearly an attractive end state, the desired outcome for our change, then we increase the chance of success. And finally, clear steps on the way. If we're very clear about, firstly, the initial steps that we take in terms of the change that we're going to bring in, and subsequently the markers of success along the way, the clear steps that we're going to take, in effect, the actions that we are going to take to realise our desired vision, then the chances of us having success again are increased. Without understanding what those steps are going to be, and without documenting them, without being very clear with the people around us, the steps that we are going to take, again, the chances of success are minimal. So we're looking for dissatisfaction with the status quo, an attractive end state, a vision really well articulated and crafted. I think we're really good at those as school leaders, and documenting and being clear with all of the stakeholders the steps along the way. And all of those things need to be qualitatively greater than any resistance or cost to you, because the perceived cost to you and to other people can create a sense of resistance. And there is always resistance. To think that everything is going to go swimmingly and there are going to be no issues is a dangerous place to be. Making sure that the dissatisfaction, the vision and the clear steps on the way are greater than any resistance. And the greatest resistance in any organisation, I always say, is the head teacher or the leaders in that organisation. Winning them over and working collaboratively minimises the resistance and enables you to have success. So there's my formula for success in terms of bringing about any change. What I want to do now is relate that to how a school improvement strategy, and the school improvement strategy in my trust has worked, actually predicated on exactly this. A number of the schools that we were privileged to take on were schools in very, very challenging circumstances that needed significant amounts of change. What we didn't have was significant amounts of staff change. And so we needed to develop a real consensus around some of the changes we needed to bring into those schools. What are the secrets of success then? What actually makes that happen, those steps of success? Well, there's a list for you here. I won't go through all of them, but certainly a couple of them to highlight. Attention to detail, making sure that that vision is clear, and making sure everybody knows what's expected of them gives you the greatest chance of achieving success with any change that you bring in. So let's look at a practical example. So this is a bit of a case study. It's Yate Academy and the statistics over the period from 2017 to 2019. And they're, well, I think they're mind-blowingly good. They're fantastic outcomes. But they don't tell the entire story. Firstly, it's not all about Progress 8, but I think Progress 8 is a pretty good proxy indicator for success that's taking place more broadly across the school. So we saw significant improvements in the first year, having picked the school up in 2017, and then further significant improvements in the following year in 2019. What were these down to? Well, it was pretty much the same staff. There were some elements in the change in leadership, but basically it was a simplicity and a clarity with which people were working that caused and impacted most greatly on the outcomes for young people. So I just want to explore with you now how some of those and what some of those changes were over the course of the period that we're talking about. As I said to you, simplicity and clarity are everything. We were clear and consistent in our intent. And in the last webinar, I talked to you about the importance of symbolism. We were absolutely clear about the 3 or 4 things that we needed to do really, really well. And the leaders made everybody else aware of that. There was great symbolism. We were persuasive of people. We explained, as you'll see in a moment, why we were doing what we were doing all the time. There was always a so that column in our plans. We're going to do this so that we achieve this. Everything, you'll see it, and in the documentation that we put together, and we were all over it. We were hands-on, the leaders were hands-on, and we were making sure that everything happened. In summary, in relation to the last webinar that we did, we were courageous, we needed to make changes, significant changes, and we were deliberate. We had a plan and we knew what we wanted to achieve. So here's the model. Here's the school improvement model that we use, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. The first thing that we will do when we're working with a school in challenging circumstances, or indeed with a school that just wants to develop outcomes for young people, is first of all look to ensure that we've got good governance. I'm not going to be exploring that in detail today, but a really important bedrock is people holding you to account for the decisions that you're taking and supporting and challenging where appropriate. Good, strong leadership in the school, and sometimes when a school's in challenging circumstances, there needs to be some elements of new leadership brought in or new influence on the leadership that exists in the school. But ensuring that we have the people who are going to be able to deliver on the model that we want to deliver on is absolutely crucial, and that people understand what it is that we're planning to do. That's not just about a change in leadership, that is about empowering leaders, making sure leaders feel valued for the work that they do, but understand with great clarity what it is that they are being asked to do and what part they play. Then usually, and this is largely with challenging schools, but a number of other schools that I've done some work with, we look at the behaviour of young people, not just their behaviour as in good, bad behaviour, but their learning behaviours, and how we can bring about a sense of real consistency in what's expected in lessons and outside of lessons. Then we look at teaching and learning, and I'll talk in a bit more detail about some of the resources and strategies we use. Then we get to grips with the curriculum and understanding which areas of the curriculum need to be developed, which need to be focused on, which need to be changed as a result of our priorities. And then finally, we expect outcomes to flow from that, and invariably they do, because of a deliberate set of actions moving through a plan that everybody is bought into. The foundations are crucial. Good governance, good leadership, everything else flows from that. So let's just quickly go through some of those. The first I mentioned is behaviour, and I'm going to talk in detail about our behaviour management strategies, just to say that it is really simple and straightforward. We talk about disruption-free classrooms, and we talk about every minute of every hour of every day being disruption-free. If you set your stall and you're clear about what you want to achieve, strong symbolism, and then you have a system that backs that up, we believe that's a central system where the leadership team are supporting in classroom to ensure that teachers can teach. We develop a consistent strap line, and that is the strap line. Every minute of every hour of every day is disruption free. We have a whole range of policies and strategies that go alongside that in relation to uniform and behaviour in lessons and expectations, and I'm happy to share those if anybody is interested. So behaviour really is the first thing. We set the vision and we're very clear about what we expect. Then we move on to talking a bit about teaching and learning. And I think in the dozens and dozens of schools that I've been into, there's a real difference in the way teaching and learning is approached. In some schools, it's not really at the heart of the school. There's not really clarity in terms of what's happening. Success in classrooms is largely dependent on the personalities of the teachers. And of course, their personality is important. They're individuals and they bring themselves to the lessons. But without a system and an approach and a joined up approach, a real consistency in language, I don't think true outstanding in teaching and learning can happen across an entire school. So we're looking for clear, simple, agreed, school-wide systems that are going to support all teachers. We ensure that it's kept the main thing all the time, and that sometimes means stopping other things. Personal development for every single teacher. We believe fundamentally that teachers develop not by big dramatic days or big dramatic incidents. We believe, like sportsmen and women, like anybody, they develop in small incremental steps, and we have systems and processes that match the theory, that match that with practice. So here's some of the resources that we use with our teaching and learning strategies. And really there's two in parallel here. There's a lesson structure, which is a structure that we bring in with flexibility and with adaptation that enables teachers to have an understanding about what we collectively, the teachers and the leaders in the school, see as a priority. And that will be nothing particularly new to you. There's some pretty basic principles of really good teaching and learning and really good lessons in there. We use a very clear language with everybody. We talk about an entry routine, a low stake quiz, instruction, direct instruction from the teachers, deliberate practice on behalf of the students, and then a learning check or review. The instruction, the deliberate practice and the learning check are cycled as many times as is needed in a lesson, then a final learning check and an exit routine. And we're very clear, in particular with the entry routines and the exit routines, that there is consistency across the school. And then the principles of better practice. So as we're developing teachers, we hang all of our conversations and all of our development upon 6 principles of better practice. Now, they're relatively arbitrary in one sense. I think to a certain extent, as long as they're rooted in good practice and good theory, it doesn't matter what they are, as long as you stick to them and everybody is using the same language. And I'll come back to those in just a moment. Let's have a look at the lesson structure. So the lesson structures, as I've mentioned, on the right hand side, you can see there we have what we do, our meet, greet, stand and seat as an example of an entry routine. You may have your own, and then we always have so that next to it. So teachers and support staff can see that these are the reasons that we do what we say we're going to do. So here's that expanded just a little bit. Teacher meets, greets the students at the door and welcomes them into the classroom so that the students enter the classroom in a calm and focused manner. Of course, students stand in silence behind their desks and the teacher checks uniform, because students are in the correct uniform, ready to start the lesson. And as we go through our lesson structure, every single element of it has a so that. So we explain exactly what is taking place. And there they are. Meet, greet, stand and seat, low stakes quiz, the teacher instruction, the deliberate practice, the learning check and the review, the final review and the exit routine. And they're really clear, unambiguous. Everybody knows exactly what is expected of them. So let's have a little look at the principles of better practice. So I talked to you about there being 6 of these. Why do we have these? We have them because they're evidence-based. They're a common language across not just an individual school, but across a group of schools. And collaboration and system leadership, which we're going to just briefly mention in a moment, brings about a real strength and dialogue across our schools and across leaders and across teachers around these principles of better practice. And they're used across all of our schools. They're useful for target setting and setting individual teachers very specific actionable steps, and they're a framework for our continued professional development. So here are the principles of teaching. There's the 6 of them that I've just mentioned, and here they are blown up, and each one has 4 subsections. And notice on the right hand side you can see the so that column, and that's really clear. So we're explaining to teachers why it is that we have these principles of better practice and the subsections, what it is that those things achieve. So you can see their routines and effective classroom management, so that we minimise, there's minimal valuable lesson time wasted dealing with low-level disruption. 1D, reinforcing effort and providing recognition so that students understand the connection between effort and achievement. So whilst these are relatively simple and relatively straightforward to understand, they bring about a real consistency of language. So this isn't the lesson structure now. These are the principles of teaching and might take place at any point during the lesson or apply to anything in the classroom. We believe that these 6 principles, pretty much everything that takes place in a classroom can be hung on these 6 principles. So we have quality of instruction, subject mastery, making it stick, adaptive teaching, and effective feedback. So there are 6 principles, and you notice each one has A, B, C, D, a subsection, and we use those labels day in, day out with conversations. So we might be looking at something in a lesson and we'd be talking about 5B, pitch high every lesson, so that students are challenged to exceed expectations. So if we're talking to a teacher about pitch of a lesson, having a conversation across a range of teachers around the pitch of the lesson, we'd be talking about 5B. And that creates a common language across the school. And that narrative, I think, is absolutely fundamental. Equally applies in primary school. This is one of our primary schools in South London, and we've just adapted some of these to make them very, very primary specific, and we use them in a very, very similar way in our primary schools. So we talked a bit about the development drop-ins earlier on. So every single teacher in my trust receives a visit for 10 or 15 minutes every 2 weeks. They're developmental, low-stakes visits, and the lessons are always visited in pairs, sometimes in threes. Teachers are set one small actionable step. There's no risk associated with this. The actionable steps need to be things that the teacher can practice immediately and that relate specifically to one of the 6 areas. We'll produce a target takeaway sheet. This is actually one for one of the head teachers in one of our schools in Gloucester. And you'll see at the bottom left-hand side there, the target, which is linked to a principle, relates to 2B. Clearly defined outcomes for pupils. And there's an actionable step. Low stakes, actionable step that the teacher can practice immediately. What we don't do is spend hours and hours monitoring teachers. What we do is record the targets and the specific teaching principles so that we're then able to see where, and you can see on the graph here, the majority of the actionable steps are being set. So we can see there that most of them are around principle 6. So we would know that we want to focus our professional development around some of the activity related to teaching principle 6. So it drives continued professional development in our school. So no scattergun days where someone's put their finger in the air and decided we're doing questioning today. Questioning's an important thing. Actually, we're going to do today what the priority is for the teachers in our school. Small actionable steps, low risk, and it creates a narrative of development in the school that teachers really value. That's our experience. Nobody feels they're being checked up on. Everybody feels that they're part of a narrative, a conversation around improvement, which is at the heart of the way we work in our organisation. I talked a little bit about system leadership earlier, and I thought you might be interested to hear from somebody other than me just for a couple of minutes. One of the people that's been a bit of an inspiration to me is leading on the MBA course that I'm currently taking is Sir David Carter, formerly the National Schools Commissioner. David was previously the Chief Exec at the Cabot Federation and previous to that head teacher at one of the schools in the Cabot Federation. David talks a lot about system leadership and its importance. So I took the opportunity to ask David why system leadership now is more important than ever and what system leadership means to him. And I thought you might be interested in what he had to say.
Hi Will, and good morning everybody. I hope you're having an interesting day, and a big thank you to everybody and a well done for everything that you've been doing for the last 5 or 6 weeks. Why is system leadership important? System leadership is something that we've only really been talking about probably for the last 10 to 15 years. And I think it's important when we talk about the importance of it to think about the definition of it. And I think system leadership takes place when leaders make decisions that impact upon the learning and the outcomes of young people, where we cross the boundaries of an individual school. So the leader makes a decision that impacts positively on children's education that they may never get to meet or never teach themselves. But I think there are different ways in which we can interpret it. And so to keep this brief and for the focus of this morning, I think there are 4 things I'd like to reflect on. System leadership is important because it's probably the way in which we get the greatest impact on standards in the shortest period of time. So when we're thinking about the challenges that we have in the education system around school improvement, they often revolve around the student behaviour, around the quality of teaching, the way that the curriculum is designed, the quality of leadership. And I don't believe that there are more challenges than there are schools in the system. So when we're thinking about the impact of system leaders, what's really important is that leaders understand what those core challenges are and move quickly and at pace to have an impact upon them. Linked to that is my second thought, which is that system leaders are probably the best means that we have of transmitting what works. I hesitate to use the phrase best practice because I think sometimes what was conceived as best practice in one school may not land as best practice in the school it's working with. So this is about effective practice and understanding what works. And we do know what works in school improvement. The success story of many of our academies, for example, particularly those that were sponsored, who are now performing as well, if not better than they've ever done, is testimony to the great leadership, often through system leaders that have made a big difference. I think the third observation is that system leadership is the glue that binds collaboration together. Collaboration doesn't happen by accident. Somebody has to hold the ring on it. Somebody has to define its purpose. Someone has to decide what it's intending to do and measure that. And somebody has to be clear what it is that we're trying to collaborate around. And system leaders are ideally placed to do that work. And the fourth one, I think, probably pulls those first three together, which is about scale. And it's the aggregating up of the challenge where we know what we need to do, and system leaders and their credible experience through many, many years of leadership and school improvement are ideally placed to identify and really understand the challenges and be very clear about what needs to be done, but also how we then aggregate up the support to do that and get the capacity in place to address those issues in our schools as quickly as possible. So system leadership for me is an incredibly important part of what we do in our education system. It's an opportunity for the best leaders to have more impact than they can ever have thought they would have done when they probably first took on their headships. And it's the means by which we scale up the effectiveness of true leadership and true school improvement.
And my thanks to Sir David for that input. Just some thoughts from me around what makes really effective collaboration, just to reflect with you on that. And this really ties back in with some of the views that I gave at the very beginning around the approaches to change management, the importance of symbolising what it is that is important to us as leaders, the fact that we all adapt and evolve as we move forward, having markers of success so we know when we're collaborating what is taking place and what we're looking for, and it strengthens with time. It doesn't wither with time, which when you have very loose collaborations without identified aims can happen. So just some things there that you might want to reflect on with your teams. So just want to finish very, very briefly talking a bit about our values and our behaviours again. This links back to the first webinar. System leadership is a value that's held very dear to us at the Chiltern Learning Trust, and that's demonstrated in the way that we have worked together across our trust to have around 40 or 50 teachers curating the lessons for all of the secondary school students across our secondary schools, and we've made that freely available in partnership with Be Ready. There are a whole series of lessons that I think some 600 or 700 schools are now accessing. So I'm highlighting that because that might be something that you might be interested in accessing, but also because that's an example of how we've tried to develop our system leadership at the Chiltern Learning Trust and influence schools that, as Sir David says, we might never meet, might never visit. The final 5 things that I wanted to mention are really characteristics of some of the very best leaders and subsequently system leaders that I see in the people that they work with most closely. So here's a bit of a checklist for you, whistle-stop tour of the 5 things that I think make absolutely fabulous leaders. Firstly, they make people feel special. People want to be part of something exciting, something that's fun. And leaders who make them feel special are leaders who inevitably get the best out of them. Secondly, leaders who don't indulge in moods. We can all be moody. We can all be a bit down or a bit challenged at certain times, and that's absolutely fine. But the people around you need to know how they're going to find you. They need to know that if they come and see you on a Tuesday afternoon after you've had year 9, you're going to be able to approach the conversations that they want to have with you in the same way as if it was a Thursday. So whilst I appreciate we can all be in a state of excitement, we can all be in a state of finding things challenging, trying to create a constancy with which other people can approach us, I think is a really, really good trait of a good leader. Thirdly, recognise the art of the possible. You are not a magician, and asking people to do things that are seemingly impossible to them over the course of a long period of time can be really challenging. Recognise the art of what's possible. Really focus on what they can achieve as opposed to what is not possible. Recognising the art of the possible and focus on it is really important. Live for today, not the next job. So talking to people about what they're going to be doing today and tomorrow is important. Focusing on what's going to happen in a week or in a month or in a year's time has a real challenge associated with it that sometimes it can feel intangible. So it's not about when I have the money. It's not about when I have the time. It's about decisiveness and focus today and what we're doing today and what we're planning to do tomorrow. And finally, I always talk about it not being about you as a leader. Talk about them, what we're doing together, about their lives, their goals and dreams, and how honourable a thing they are doing. Focusing on them, talking about us as opposed to I, is a really, really important trait of the very best leaders. So I hope that's been helpful, just a bit of a whistle-stop tour through both some of the principles that we use for school improvement, but also some of the principles associated with the leadership of change and with collaboration and system leadership. Please stay safe and look after yourselves. And as I point out there, sometimes we just need someone to be there, not to fix anything or to do anything in particular, but just let us feel that we are cared for and supported. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Again, absolutely fascinating video that you've put together there discussing system leadership, and I think the thread that ran through it is a level of consistency that you need in a whole school approach. There's been a few questions that have come up, and I don't know if there's anything that you've picked up on that's come through. I'm just going to give people a few minutes just to sort of digest it. I think the questions are building up at the moment. I hadn't intended this, but all the sessions that we've had so far, whether they've been on Ofsted, whether they've been on leadership, whether they've been on any aspect of school life, I think the biggest thread that seems to come through is that a whole school ethos on whatever approach you take must be taken if you're looking to actually impact teaching and learning within a school, and the fact that that level of consistency needs to be observable in all areas of school life, all the way from school, parents, students and their perception of it, as all the way through to the senior leaders within the school, and then beyond within like the role that you have as a CEO for Multi Academy Trust.
Hi, Arv.
Hi,
Hi, how you doing?
good.
Well done running all the technical side of things. Would it be worth me, and good morning everybody, just contributing to a couple of the questions which seem to be a bit of a theme coming up? I don't know if that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I think definitely.
Yeah, I think, and thank you everyone for listening, and thanks for the feedback that we've been getting through the questions. I think there's a kind of couple of themes that come up. One was around behaviour, and people have said, can we have a look at your behaviour policies and strategies? And I've just put a link on the answer to some of the questions to one of our schools, 5 Acres in the Forest of Dean, where there's some, they're really clearly laid out on the website. So do please click that link and go and have a look at some of those policies. The other thing that's come up is some, as I expected, and rightly so, some questions around the impact of the developmental drop-ins, and when teachers are being observed every couple of weeks, how we ensure A, that we're able to achieve that, and B, that in doing that we don't heighten stress levels or heighten anxiety. And I think my response to that is in two parts. Firstly, I think it has exactly the opposite effect, because what we're creating is a low risk, a low stakes environment for people to develop. This is not about monitoring, it is about developing teachers when we visit and have conversations with them. So actually what we find is that, this is really, really apparent when we go in and support a school that's really broken and in challenging circumstances, but in other schools to a lesser extent, all of the stress and anxiety comes from these big high stakes sort of learning walks where sometimes the teachers don't know you're coming, or there's 1 hour lesson observations at the in the late end of the summer term or the beginning of the autumn term, and everything hangs on it and big show lessons take place. I think it takes teachers a year to get over the stress of doing those. A 15-minute developmental drop-in gives teachers an opportunity to have a developmental conversation. And I think I mentioned this in the last webinar, every single teacher across our trust has as their performance management objective to engage with the DDI process, and that is it. So if they engage with it, no matter where they are on their developmental journey, that's all that we ask. I think the other thing I'm just noting here, a couple of people have asked for the teaching principles. I think, Arv, I've shared with you an editable version of the teaching principles, which I think you're going to share through the system. They're their route. A couple of people have asked where they've come from. We've drawn inspiration from a whole range of different people, people who are practicing in schools, a lot of the Doug Lemov stuff around from Teach Like a Champion, but other literature and work that he's done, and we've linked with him. We've taken inspiration from some of the Rosenshine principles. Those of you who've heard Tom Sherrington talk, you'll hear him talking a lot about that around direct instruction and some of those areas. And so everything that we've developed in terms of the teaching principles has been developed using really sound evidence-based research around what actually works. So that's kind of the efficacy of it, if you like. But the teaching principles will be shared, I think, by Arv towards the end of the session. I'm also more than happy to share the slides. A number of people asked that. A few people have asked how long the drop-ins are. They're 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes. The teachers know that they're coming. They're aware. They're low stress, low stakes, and an opportunity to have a really good developmental conversation.
There's quite a few hands up at the moment. Adrian Rogers.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Alf? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Good morning, Adrian. Good morning, Adrian.
Just a couple of things, Will. One, I know my system should work, so I'm trying to stop the embarrassment.
Yeah.
and secondly, I really like the collaborative approach, Will. So it's less of a question, more of a statement. I think that if all leaders were like you and had that commitment to share what works in their trust rather than a competitive approach, I think we'd have a much better system. And I just really liked your first two sentences, Will. That sets the tone, that collaborative approach to share whatever you do, not to make your trust the best, but to work with other trusts. And just a big thank you, really, for that collaborative approach.
Really appreciate that, Adrian. I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, what you're really talking about is system leadership. And it's interesting, after the last webinar where we did talk a bit about system leadership, you'll have heard Sir David Carter there talk about the importance of it. A couple of people responded and said, I'd find it really difficult to be undertaking work where I didn't know the people I was working with and I didn't come face to face with the students who I was speaking to. That sense of collaboration with people you may never come into but influence them is really difficult. I get that. I totally understand that. And you know, I'm certainly not perfect. I never will be. And I you know, one of the first things I'll do when we finish this webinar is I'll ask Arv for the feedback, because I always want to understand the impact of what I'm doing. And whilst I may not speak to the 340, 80, 400 people that we've had on the webinar personally this morning, I will want to get feedback in terms of what's happening, what's working, and how we can improve. So that's the first comment. The second thing is around feedback in particular. One of the cultures that we've had in my trust, and again, we haven't always got it right and we're always learning, is that we always welcome feedback. And we welcome it, not because we think we should just welcome feedback. We welcome it because you look at the teaching principles that that I've been talking through this morning. They are where they are, not because someone woke up and wrote them one morning. They're there because we have taken feedback from teachers, from leaders across our trust, externally and internally, that's enabled them to develop over the weeks and over the months that we've been working. So I really appreciate your words, Adrian. They're very kind. I think my experience, I used to lead Pixel up until a couple of years ago, working with the now late Sir John Rowling, who was a massive inspiration to me. And I think the system leadership that came out of my experiences at Pixel, and then subsequently with By Leaders for Leaders, and the work that we're now trying to do as a trust, impacting the wider system, is something I do. I feel really proud of it. It really excites me. It energizes me. And you know, opportunities like this, having a webinar or running a conference, I suspect we're going to be doing less and less of those, or not doing many of those in the foreseeable future, is certainly an opportunity to engage with people that enables me to get feedback. So yeah, I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. I am going to try some new names. I've got Tom Way. Tom Way, are you still there? Tom Way.
Hi, Alf.
Hi, Tom.
Yeah.
Hi, Tom.
I really like what you've done, and I think there's a lot of things there that are really simple, which sounds silly, but you know, often the simplest things are the hardest ones to see sometimes as well.
Absolutely.
To implement. I wonder if you can give advice. I'm stepping up from a middle leader role now, starting to get more experience into an SLT role, into that sort of higher level. And I wonder if you could kind of maybe give some top tips, maybe 3 top pieces of advice, someone new stepping into that role to kind of look, because as you've alluded to, there's so much information out there. There's so many different principles, so many different structures that you can try and implement. And obviously, it's quite difficult stepping into that new role, thinking about where do you start, and also how do you start to try and influence those things.
Okay, so here's 3 things for you, Tom. I don't know if these are helpful or not. The first one, and I often see this in the middle leaders that I've interviewed for senior teacher roles. When someone comes into a middle leadership role, maybe they're head of department or they're leading up a particular area in the school. Often they're doing that because they're the specific expert. So they might be an expert scientist, or they might be someone who is an expert at developing a science curriculum, for example. So there can be a sense in the middle leaders that they need to have the technical answers. They need to be able to give the responses. As people then progress in their leadership career, the sort of specialisms become less well defined. You will have a job description and you'll have a particular focus, but you won't necessarily have had an experience that is going to directly influence the actions that you are then going to take in a particular area. So the first thing I would say is, don't feel that you've got to have all the answers to all the questions. I remember when I first walked in and met the leadership team as an assistant head at Greenshaw High School, blimey, 15, 20 years ago. And you know, I had that feeling of, I've been brought in here. They've got to see me for, you know, this person who's going to have some of the answers. Some of the answers, yes. All of the answers, absolutely no. Make sure that you don't feel you have to have all of those answers. The second thing is, be open to having your mind changed. And I think I mentioned this at the last on the last webinar. Don't be one of those people who takes a view and then sticks with it. Yes, that is important sometimes, but is not open to other people's views, a sense of creative excitement. So whatever it is you might be focusing on, you might be the Raising Standards leader, or you might be leading on behaviour or pastoral support, or whatever it might be, make sure that you are one of those people who is open to having their mind changed, but requiring really good evidence in order for that change to take place. So they're 2 things. And then I suppose the third thing is about, and I think this is probably the most important thing in the lifeline of a school, whatever area you're working in as a senior leader, create a narrative. People come to work on a Monday. They work the week and then they come back the following Monday. If you're leading in a particular area in a school, make it feel like they are on a journey. They don't want next Monday to feel just like this Monday, like the following Monday, like the following Monday. Of course, they're teaching lessons and of course they're doing similar things in their day, but it's down to you as a senior leader to create a journey for the people in your team and that you're influencing to go on. So plot, you know, look, I know I said earlier on in the webinar, focus on the here and the now, but make sure the here and now is part of a journey. So people feel excited and energized. People feel like they're going somewhere. People feel like there are points where you're going to reflect. People feel like you are telling a story and creating a narrative across the area in which you're working. And I'm just going to slip a 4th one in, actually, if it's okay. And I think that is just around a focus on you. We often talk about humility being the ability to step back and not feel it's got to be all about you as a leader. And of course that is right, but it is about you as a leader. We do need to recognize that, and nourishing and energizing and being fit and healthy and able to drive what you want forward is as important for you personally as it is for you to extol that with the team that are around you. So looking after yourself, of course, physically and mentally, but also nourishing your inquisitive nature, making sure you're engaging with other people outside of your school. I mean, I talked a bit about this at the last webinar. The first thing I would do if I was going on to a promoted role in the weeks before it, I would identify 2 or 3 schools where they were doing what I was going to be doing absolutely brilliantly. I would go to those schools. You'd be welcome to come to any of mine if we fit the mold, and I would steal some brilliant ideas and take them back. I have predicated my career on that, and it certainly served me well. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Tom. Got one, David, are you there?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, David.
Hi, Will. I think, first of all, I would echo what Adrian had to say earlier, and I think what I really find inspirational is your authenticity and the passion with which you speak. So thank you. I think
thank you
at this time. But can I ask you? I deliberately moved to a school at the start of this academic year that went into special measures the previous term. And so a lot of what you've said and your ideals and values and of the trust that you work for, you lead, resonate deeply. So can I ask, what has been, in your experience, the biggest barrier to change, and particularly to some of those quick wins?
Okay, that's a brilliant. It's the $1 million question, isn't it? In a way, I think there's probably a couple of things actually. One is a little less tangible, and I think you can approach this in a number of different ways. And I'm not about to launch into a growth mindset lecture, but it is the mindset of the people that you're working most closely with. When you're working in a challenging environment, when you go into a school in special measures, or you go into a school that's at the bottom end of RI that's really struggling, or you're in a good school where they're just really challenging. You know, I've taken on schools that are good and they're just not good at all. So be very careful with the Ofsted label. But I think the mindset of the immediate people around you, you need to build a consensus and a collaboration of people that are going to work closely with you to move it forward. Inevitably, there are going to be some people, and we largely find that there are some people who are really negative. There are some people who are really hard to win over, but actually in the vast majority of cases, it's because they've been led appallingly. It's because the leadership has been overcomplicated, that there's been no clarity. There have been layer after layer after layer of new initiatives, and people are just burnt out. And what they're crying out for is simplicity. Start with the really simple things. I showed you the lighthouse model of school improvement. Make sure you've got good governance in place, so that doesn't hamstring you, because that can be a real challenge. If you've got governors sort of, you know, not really understanding their role and maybe too operationally involved, getting the governance right so it's supportive and challenging, getting the leadership right in the school I've mentioned, but then just deciding what you're going to do and making things really simple and really clear. The biggest barrier, I suppose, is therefore leadership, is people trying to do too much too quickly. So that's the first thing. And that really is around the mindset of the people around you. I think the second thing I would say is, I suppose it's a bit more pragmatic. It's about the identification of the allocation of resources. It's about where you're going to put your efforts. It's about what people are doing around you. I mean, we've taken on a number of schools in really challenging circumstances. Not only, we've also taken on a number of schools who are absolutely flying, but we've taken on a number in challenging circumstances. And the biggest barrier to moving things forward is that sense of isolation. So you've got people walking around with their job description slapped to their forehead. All they're worried about is fulfilling their job description. And of course, that's a part of everybody's job. But what we've tried to do is just get everybody to relax, make things simple, and just say, these are the things that we're going to focus on, and we're going to follow them through, and kind of reduce the stress levels by stopping people worrying about fulfillment and satisfying tick boxes and completing you know, massive long lists of things to do that nobody really knows where they've come from. I could go on to talk a bit about staffing, because it obviously, depending on where the schools are, there can be real issues around recruitment and retention and all that side of things. I do retain people. I look to retain really good people, but and one of the barriers is that people want to leave. I'm very careful about, you know, you'll find lots of CEOs and lots of leaders are creative about how they retain people with money or, you know, with promises. I'm very careful about that, because I think you can get into a pretty awful cycle of everybody feeling you're just going to hand over lots and lots of money. And of course, you know, remuneration and rewarding people is important, but and getting that right is important, but so is just making things really simple and really clear. And I think if you do that, the chances of success just go through the roof.
Thank you. Well, I hope that answers the question for you, David. Thank you for your questions. Everybody else, I'm going to come towards the end of the session now. As Will's alluded to, he has shared some resources with me, which I'll be sending out after this webinar ends, but a few questions have come up in terms of other reading materials, etc., that you've touched upon. Where can people access more of the details that you've been talking about? Is there somewhere that they can go to?
So very, very, very quickly, if you go on to probably the best website in terms of some of the policies and some of the structures is 5 Acres High School in the Forest of Dean. So just search up 5 Acres and have a look. The behaviour policies there, the teaching and learning policies there, other bits and pieces there. Make sure. I mean, I'm not I'm not on commission for these. Doug Lemov, great inspiration. Rosenshine principles, and some of the unpacking of that Tom Sherrington's done in his booklet has been a real inspiration to some of the stuff we've done. Have a look at that. I'm more than happy if anybody wants to direct message me on Twitter or LinkedIn to ask for particular resources that you've seen. A couple of questions came up about the reading program, for example. I'm more than happy if you DM me to share with you our literary canon that we use for our reading program. Or our reading program is online, we have a YouTube channel, so you can access, while we're in lockdown, all of our reading program for your students to use now. So fill your boots. But if you want any more of the resources, do please direct message me through LinkedIn or through Twitter. I'll be happy to share my email address there and have a conversation with you.
That's brilliant, Will. And for those of you that struggle when you type in Will Smith online to find Will Smith, on Twitter it's at Mr. Will_Smith. So if you're looking for Will Smith on Twitter, that's where you'll find him. And just touching on some of the other things, other people that you've mentioned, and both of those people are actually part of the LDeduchat series of webinars between now and July. We have got Sir David Carter later on in our sessions, and we've also got Tom Sherrington talking about Rosenshine and the principles behind that. So if you are interested in those and you want to have a live conversation with them, do have a look on our Eventbrite and have a look at the dates that they'll be appearing, and hook into those sessions too. Finally, I just want to thank you immensely. This is the second session, Will, and I know that behind the scenes we'll be doing a lot more together moving forward. And I hope that everybody, and just looking at the reaction on Twitter and actually on the questions, everybody's found the aspects that you've shared this morning and the previous section absolutely inspiring. So thank you again, Will, for that.
Thank you very much, Al. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
So just wrapping up this session now. This week we have, on Wednesday, we've got Simon Webb, who will be looking at the educational inspection framework, as in the stories so far. So some of the questions that came up with the Dean last week to do with deep dives, which are more broader issues to do with whole school agendas and whole school strategies. Simon will be looking at some of those. So do hook into that session there. On Thursday, we have Pranav Patel, who'll be looking at the leadership of perception, bias, and then also the decolonisation of the curriculum. And then on Friday, we're going back into deep dives with Nikki Goodman and some of her colleagues, and she'll be looking at subject specific to do with English the subject, and that's on Friday. So there's a lot of stuff to do with strategy, a lot of stuff to do with whole school agendas, a lot to do with how do we move forward as leaders to create the environments within our schools that's going to be conducive to good learning and for productive environments. Just want to catch up with, again, I just want to thank on Twitter today, again, it's been going absolutely mad on there. We've got Ian Stonnell from Denby, who's been doing the takeover for at Chiltern TSA. Do hook into Twitter if you are on Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, maybe the time to start joining, and follow at Chiltern TSA, and hook into the chat. The hashtag we're using throughout the whole of these sessions is hashtag LDeduchat, and do search for us online. Finally, as I said, there's a whole host of sessions that are running forward. Tickets are still open. Do get on there and register. And this is Arv Cowshall just signing off on another session of Leadership Development in Education. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you soon.